Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs. This is Sally Ann Sachs. And today we'd like to welcome Mike Matsas. Welcome. Mike's going to talk to us about something called Romaniote Jews. Romaniote. We've heard of Ashkenazic, we've heard of Sephardic, we've talked about those. Explain what the Romaniote is.
Romaniote Jews or Byzantine Jews are the ones who lived in Greece, and they were speaking in Greek mixed with some Hebrew words. And they were in the city where I was born in Ioannina, and Preveza, Arta, Patra, and all the cities where the Jews were killed in the massacre of 1821, which is not known by many people. Actually, the Jewish historians don't mention it. The Jewish Encyclopedia doesn't mention it. And the Christians and Jews who know about it, they don't want to discuss it because they don't want to offend the Greeks.
But let's back up a minute. Let me see if I've got my history right. What I learned was that even before the Romans entered Palestine, some Jews had moved out into surrounding areas and had moved into what was Greece. And that this is an ancient Jewish community.
You are absolutely right. There were Greek Jews before there were any Greek Christians.
Right.
There were communities in Corinth, in Salonika, Athens, Veria, and there is historical and archaeological evidence proving that there were synagogues in Corinth and Athens and in Veria. And that's why Apostle Paul went to preach to them.
And the word Romaniote means comes from Roman? Is it Roman
The
time?
word Romaniote is related to Roman because all this area was occupied by Rome.
Okay. So now you mentioned a massacre.
Yes.
Which I had not heard about either. What was the massacre? What happened?
Yes. In 1821, the Turks in Constantinople or Istanbul killed the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Gregory V and asked some Turkish Jews to throw his body to the sea. When the news arrived in Greece, the Greek Jews of the newly liberated cities of Greece, because there was a revolution against the Turks who occupied Greece for 400 years, they had liberated all these cities I mentioned before. They killed all the Jews there. For example, in the city of Agrinio, where I grew up, there were 200 Jewish families and they were massacred there. The same thing was in Tripolitsa.
And what do you think the total number of Jews killed in 1821 might have been?
I don't know. It's very hard to tell. I have a book about Agrinio where they mention specifically 200 Jewish families. And in another place I found out how a Greek leader, Kanelos Deligiannis, was a righteous Gentile. He saved 12 Jews from the prosperous Jewish community of Tripolitsa, where he lived. And he had to keep them for 3 years because the anti-Jewish feeling was so strong. For 3 years they were in his house, and he had soldiers, who were guarding them. And only in 1824 he was able to secretly move them to the island of Zakynthos, which was not then under Greek control.
Amazing.
And one more thing, because I said there wasn't even one Jew alive, when the King Othon and Amalia of Bavaria came to their throne in Athens, they brought with them their Viennese dentist, Dr. Lefkowitz, who immediately converted to Christianity upon arrival.
But you've written a book.
Well,
yes.
Okay.
Let's start first. We're going to talk about what happened in the Second World War.
Okay.
Which we've just done another show on the Holocaust, so this very much relates to it.
Yes.
Now, where were you when Second World War
My
started?
father was a bank employee, National Bank of Greece. So fortunately, he was transferred from Ioannina, where I went to kindergarten in the Jewish school that you have a photograph.
I'm going to interrupt that just a minute, and hopefully while we're talking, they'll put up a map and show where your city is located, up in the northwest corner.
Northwest, correct. I was in Ioannina until the age of 5. Then my father was moved from Ioannina to Arta, from Arta to Preveza, from Preveza to Agrinio, which means I attended 3 different Jewish elementary schools, from kindergarten to the time that I graduated.
All those cities had Jewish schools.
All these cities had Jewish schools, and I, as far as I know, I'm the only survivor of all these 3 Jewish elementary schools. And fortunately, my father was transferred from Preveza to Agrinio, where after the massacre of 1821 of the 200 Jewish families, there were only 40 Jews who had arrived from the north. So all 40 Jews were survived. And perhaps we are the only community which did not obey any German rules, and we went to the mountains and we survived.
Oh, you lived in the mountains?
For 1 year.
Okay.
So the rest of the
You
Jews,
said didn't obey German rules. What are you talking about?
Yes, the Germans always started with a registration of the Jews, very innocuous, nothing important. So we were in Agrinio. Life was absolutely normal for us. We're talking about September 1943. People were working, going to school, and one of the Jewish merchants went to Athens to buy merchandise. And when he went there, he found out that the big Jewish shops were closed. And he immediately came back to tell us. And when he told us, we got ready and we went to the mountains. We found out later, we didn't even know, this is important for me because it shows how even if we know something that looks suspicious, we would be alert and do something to save ourselves. All we knew was that the shops were closed. Why? We did not know. We found out later. They were closed because the Germans requested the Rabbi of Athens, Rabbi Barzillai, to give them a list of the Jews of Athens. At this point, a Jewish man of the resistance, Baruch Shibi, he had the idea of abducting the rabbi or killing him, because he knew what happened in Salonika, where the rabbi cooperated with the Germans, thinking that if you obey the Germans, everything will be all right. So they took the rabbi to the mountains, and that was a signal for the Jews to disperse. That's why we went to the mountains.
That's amazing. So now I get to ask. So you've written a book, and it's called The Illusion of Safety. What's the book about?
We were under the impression that we were safe. We knew nothing. There was no Jew who knew anything in Greece about what was going on outside of Greece.
Really? How is that possible?
Because we did not have any radios. The newspapers were giving us only information which was censored by the Germans and the Italians. And the only source of information we had was the BBC. And we were relying on that. My father would come from the bank every day with the latest bulletin in his shoe. And that was the thing we would do. We would read to find out what was going on. By 1943, we had nothing but victories everywhere. And we were thinking everything was all right.
Were the Germans in your town?
In September 40, we were in the Italian zone of occupation until September 8th, 1943, when the Italians capitulated. Then the Germans came. So we were under German control.
Even with the Germans in the town, you weren't frightened?
We didn't do anything to them.
They didn't do anything to you?
We didn't, and the Germans were very polite. They didn't do anything to anybody at that time. We are talking about from September 8th, 1943 till October 3rd that we left.
So your book describes what life was. What is the subject matter of your book?
The entire war from 1940, 41 until 45.
For the Jews of Greece?
Yes.
So you must have done a lot of research to do this.
Yeah, I started when I was 14.
What?
Well,
Really?
when my father, was a bureaucrat, so he wrote a few dates that looked important to him during that period. that's all I had in 1944. October 44, the Germans left, and I went back to school. So on the basis of this list of dates that he had, I wrote a little book that was 1 year in the mountains. And I gave that to my teacher of literature, who liked me. 6 months later, when I went to ask him for his opinion, he simply gave me back the manuscript. What happened was that I was very much in favor of the resistance. I liked the partisans, I liked their songs, and that was the time that the collaborators of the Germans came to power. And anyone who had ideas like that was
in trouble.
In real trouble. Many were imprisoned, lost their jobs, exiled, executed.
But your teacher didn't warn you?
The teacher didn't want to say anything. He didn't want to be, was
one way or the other.
Civil war was starting also. He didn't want to be neither on the left nor on the right. But he considered me as doing something that, he didn't say anything though.
But it was dangerous.
So my father, when he heard all that and he took a look at the book and he saw that I liked partisan songs, he made a hiding place in under the heavy dining table. And this manuscript remained there until 1963.
Oh my goodness.
At that time, my father and mother were going to come to America for the wedding of my sister. And he took the manuscript and burnt it in the yard of the house because he didn't want any Greek policeman or any American custom official to see that I was in favor of the resistance.
Even all those years later.
Well, what was the situation? Where were you at that point? Were you in the United States by then?
Which point?
63, when they were coming
Oh,
for the
yeah,
wedding.
Yes. In 1953, I mean, I went to the university. I graduated, then I became an officer, dental officer in the Greek army for 3 years, and then I came to America. Of course, since I didn't do anything against the Greeks, I was a very accepted nationalist, and that's how I was an officer, and that's how I came. But still, I love those who fought the Germans, and I hate those who collaborated with the Germans. And many people don't like that in Greece to this day.
That brings up the subject I wanted to mention to you. I mentioned to you before the show started, and I asked you if you knew what a blood libel was, this medieval accusation that Jews killed children, Christian children, to use blood for religious things. And I said that in the United States there's only one recorded incidence of this, and it involved my family, and that the man who had started it was Greek. And I asked you, what was anti-Semitism, what was the state of anti-Semitism in Greece generally? And you said?
To begin with, you saw that they killed everybody innocent people,
right,
basically.
In 1820, you told
and this is all related to religion. Because if you go to school and they tell you this wonderful person, Jesus Christ, was killed by the Jews, you are bound to hate the Jews. I believe that for anyone who is a good Christian, it's extremely difficult to love a Jew if he's indoctrinated with this kind of thinking from the time he is 4 or 5 years old. And
that was common.
And this continues to this day. For example, we were in Ioannina in February. There are out of 2,000 Jews who used to be there, there are only 35 elderly people. They all live in one apartment building. There is anti-Semitic graffiti with big red letters on the front wall. If they clean it, it is placed again the next night. The cemetery was desecrated. So I said, how about if we put lights and we put cameras to catch the culprits? They gave up. They don't care anymore.
Are they afraid? Do they stay there because they've always been there? What?
They're not afraid. I mean, nobody attacks them personally, but they know that there is anti-Semitism.
And so, how many of the Jews of Greece were killed by the Nazis in large numbers?
First of all, I never call them Nazis. I call them Germans.
Germans, thank you.
Because they are all responsible for it, and Hitler wouldn't have done it if the entire people was not in his favor, even if they were afraid. And any time there was some resistance, Hitler gave in. For example, I have two friends who are, their father was a Christian, the mother is Jewish, but they feel very strongly being Jews because they were in a concentration camp for 3 years. And they told me that when Hitler wanted to remove the crosses from the schools in Bavaria and people protested, Hitler gave up. When the spouses of Jews protested in Berlin, he gave up.
Yes.
So in other words, he was a good politician and he did what the people wanted.
Okay, so back to the, what was the fate of the Jews of Greece during the Holocaust?
Well, 87% of them were killed.
87.
Yes. And that means 2,000 also have come back, so you have maybe 90% arrested.
And you said that you feel that the United States bears some guilt.
Great guilt, because they could have informed us. There were British military missions in the mountains helping the resistance. There were American secret agents in the cities. This is what I found in the American archives. And it's not only me who I'm a nobody, I'm a dentist, but in books, let's start with the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department accused the government back during the war for acquiescence of this government in the murder of the Jews of Europe.
Our Treasury Department accused the executive?
Yes,
Wow, I
State
didn't know
Department
that.
and the President.
I didn't know that. You found that in the archives downtown here in Washington?
Maybe not in the archives, but in a book, The Abandonment of the Jews.
Oh, yes, and that
Yeah.
was researched in the archives. I saw those people doing the research.
Then there was the executive director of the War Refugee Board, John Pelle, who accused the government for suppressing information, and by doing that, we are accomplices to what the Germans were doing. I mean, these are big words.
Right, and you said that you said before the show that Greece was not Poland. And I said to you, you mean the geography. The geography is significant. Why don't you explain that a little bit?
That was a very good question. Geography is very important because we were surrounded we had mountains in which there were thousands of villages. And by 1943, there were partisans there. The Germans were afraid to go to the mountains unless they had, let's say, at least 600 soldiers or more approaching the area. And the partisans could ambush them. There has been a case in which the Germans went to capture 5 Jewish families, and near Mount Olympus, the Battle of Caracalla, they captured they captured the 5 Jewish families. 3 Jewish men attempted to escape to inform the partisans, and they were killed. The 4th was successful and approached a unit, a battalion nearby, which included Jewish fighters, including a cousin of mine, Joseph Matsas. They attacked the Germans and they killed 252 of them. And they never went to capture any other Jews any place.
It wasn't worth it to them. It was too hard.
That's right. The price was very hard. But we did not know what was going on. That was the main thing. And the people who could have told us did not tell us.
So those of you that did get into the mountains in time,
Anyone would go to the mountains.
They survived.
Even from the city of Ioannina, where 91% of the Jews were killed, even they, 2 cousins of my father, first cousins, were on business to buy grapes in a village. And when they heard that the relatives were captured, they returned and they went to surrender to the Germans, and they were killed. I might be making a mistake about grapes because this was in March. It could have been milk and cheese because my family was involved in making wine and cheese.
So how, you said it was hard for them to get up into these villages because the roads were poor or inaccessible, or?
Up till a certain point, there were roads, but beyond that, there were thousands of villages where you could have to go on foot. Yes.
On foot?
Yes.
And they survived? So
Yes.
then, when your family went to the mountains, how did you get there?
That's a very good question. We didn't know what to do, and there were two choices. One was to go with the right wing or the left wing. We didn't know anything. My father was a bank employee, so during the war, I was given the task of delivering a gun and ammunition to the leader of the resistance in the city. And
Who gave you this task?
Well, the leader was a friend of my father, and when they were going to give him the gun and ammunition, he must have told them to bring it to our house, which would not be a suspicious house. And then my father put everything in a basket and told me to go from the back streets. I went through the main street. I even touched an enemy soldier as I was passing, and I gave it to them. So we asked them, this is what happens, what should we do? He said, come, abandon your house, come straight to my house. And from there, he arranged with a taxi. With a taxi, we went 30 miles up in the mountain, and beyond that, we walked for 3 hours to the village where we stayed for the war.
Did you know anybody in that village
Nobody,
before?
we didn't know anybody. We just went as tourists. We rented a room.
With a suitcase.
Well, we didn't have suitcases. We had to use 3 horses and a donkey.
Oh my
We
God.
had food and everything.
How many of you were there?
My father, mother, and my sister, who is here in Bethesda.
And how old were you and your sister at the time?
13, a few more months. My sister was 8 years younger. 8 years younger.
5 years old? This little
Yeah.
girl is on a donkey?
Oh, yeah, on a horse.
If you had to do what you had to do, right?
So where you actually went to, it says here that you researched in British archives as well. You went to London to do research?
I did it indirectly. If you pay somebody there, they do the
Yes.
research for you. I did it by myself here in the National Archives and in the Roosevelt Hyde Park archives.
Oh, really? Why there?
Presidential.
Well, because there is a big archive there, and according to the real researchers, I discovered things that they couldn't find, and I was the first one to do so
Oh, really?
in 1975.
So when did you write this book?
I started the writing again in 75, and I collected all kinds of information from books and interviews and so on. And then I went into the archives.
And so the book actually has been out in existence for a long time now.
No, I couldn't find a publisher because the one who wanted to publish it wanted me to remove anything that was in the archives because I'm not a specialist, and I refused to do it until somebody found a publisher who was willing to do it.
So you came here to study, and when did the rest of your family come here?
Well, I came in 1956 to stay for 9 months. But then, when I was in New York in the first 5 days, I loved the country, I loved the museums, I loved Temple Emmanuel. You know, we are Orthodox Jews in Greece, and I never liked the services. While here in Temple Emmanuel was like being in the Metropolitan Opera. You know, I loved it.
Very reformed.
And I decided to stay. And therefore, the first year of postgraduate studies didn't do any good. Then Georgetown didn't want me to stay, so I went to Howard for 3 years. I graduated. I became an instructor there for 2 years, and then I went into private practice.
Very
And
interesting.
did you bring the rest of your family over then?
When I decided to stay, I wanted them to come. So my sister came first in 1959, and my parents came in '63.
And they were, did they adjust or did
Well, the way I did it was so well organized that they loved it. Every summer they would go to Greece for 3 months, and because my father's salary would not come here, they were able to enjoy themselves there more than they would normally, because my mother didn't want to spend the money as usual. And this went on for 33 years.
Oh, marvelous. Do you often go back to Greece yourself?
We were there in February for a wedding, but I am not going to go back to my hometown of Ioannina. I felt very bad because I was with my daughter and son-in-law who wanted to make a video, and we saw all the places. You have to know I lost 115 relatives in Ioannina, and I don't plan to go back. It bothered me very much.
This is a genealogy show, and we've been really not talking too much about genealogy. What about the records of the Jews that lived there, and the synagogue records or anything like that?
Yes. My uncle, Micheal Matsas, who was a survivor of Auschwitz, collected all the names of the people who were killed, and with the financial help from his son, Naum Matsas, they have in the synagogue now marble plaques all over the walls on which the names of approximately 1,700 people are engraved.
Okay, that's the synagogue in New York you're speaking.
No, the synagogue in Ioannina.
Oh, in Ioannina.
Yes.
But the largest Romaniot population still around is probably in New York now.
It's in New York. What happened was the population in Ioannina was something like 4,000.
We're just about out of time.
Okay.
But, thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate everything that you've told us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And all the nice work you've done.